EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome in, everybody, to a Thursday edition of Birds 365 here on JAKIB Sports. The week is moving right along. That Super Bowl is moving more and more into the past as we roll on in the offseason here, and plenty to talk about on this Thursday edition of Birds 365. Johnny Mac, how you doing in this Thursday morning, brother?
Doing well. Happy Kevin Patulo Day for all those who celebrate.
And I'd like to give a congratulations as well to all the listeners of Birds 365 who had a month to prepare for Kevin Patulo Day this year, Johnny Mac.
Yeah, I mean, it became pretty clear behind the scenes that he was going to be the guy. I think he would have been the offensive coordinator before this, to be honest, if Nick Sirianni had his druthers. So, the fact that we talked about a lot about the accomplishment of winning a Super Bowl, what that does for a player. It also does a lot for a coach.
Right.
And you see not only with the elevation of Kevin, but also bringing in Parks Frazier as the new passing game coordinator. You see the added heft behind Nick Sirianni after winning the Super Bowl championship, because, he didn't get to do this last year, to be blunt. And, he worked with Parks in Indianapolis, so he's familiar with him. Obviously, he's been best friends with Kevin Patulo for years. That's been his right-hand man since he got here in the organization, the associate head coach, and now he had the heft to make the move.
There you go. Nick Sirianni hires Kevin Patulo as your offensive coordinator, Parks Frazier as your passing game coordinator, and here we are off to the races now as we prep to move on in the offseason. Johnny Mac, you just mentioned a couple interesting things there with obviously Nick Sirianni earning more cachet, as a word we like to use on Birds 365, earning more of that here with the win, which I think is fair, but I do understand both sides of this, so let's run through it. Well, before we get into the pros and cons of Kevin Patulo, and I do think there are some that are worth mentioning on both sides of the aisle, can you give everybody a little bit of a background, John, on Kevin Patulo, where he came from? I know he's been here 4 years with Nick Sirianni, but give the people a background on Kevin Patulo, because I must have got 10 messages last night, John. Who the hell is Kevin Patulo? I said, you don't listen to Birds 365. Yeah. And I put a little slash on him. But can you give the people a background on Kevin?
Well, most recently is the associate head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, so you should know who he was. He's been the pass game coordinator since Nick Sirianni got here. If you go back to Nick Sirianni, there were signs early on. One of the first things Nick said is, Kevin helps me out. This is back in 2021. It helps me out with logistical stuff and setting up coaching interviews. And he was talking about Kevin Patulo. So he was, he wasn't the first hire he made. He was very close. And that's how they were neighbors in Indianapolis when they were together out there. So they're very close from a personal perspective. And they trust each other. Nick had just mentioned down at the Super Bowl, he runs everything by Kevin Patulo. Every decision he makes, he runs by Kevin Patulo. So a lot of those assistant head coaches, associate head coach titles are kind of overblown, the reason to give somebody a higher paycheck, but not in the case of Kevin. He's been very important for this organization since he's gotten here. So then I think the next question is, well, why wasn't he the offensive coordinator? Well, circumstance. When you move on from Shane Steichen because you had to, there was concern in the organization, which it's always ironic when this happens. They didn't want to lose Brian Johnson. Brian was getting interviews all over the place to be an offensive coordinator when he was the Eagles quarterbacks coach. Carolina would have hired him. Green Bay probably would have hired him. A couple other teams had a ton of interest. So the belief was, well, if we don't make him the offensive coordinator, we're going to lose him. And ironic, they lost the next year, had a because they wanted to, because he didn't live up to the expectations. So I think he would have gotten the job there. And last year, there was no opportunity. I mean, Eagles can spin it any way they want. I think they recovered nicely from what I talked about in the offseason, that I didn't like the setup. And by that, I meant I don't like preventing the head coach from doing what he wants to do. I think if you're going to have somebody be the head coach, I think you should let him be the head coach.
Right.
Sort of my philosophy. And the Eagles kind of straddled that fence and made him go outside the organization. And they certainly salvaged the situation. They won the Super Bowl, but there was no opportunity for Nick Sirianni to do it last year. And then this year, Kellen gets the Saints job, and all of a sudden Kevin's the offensive coordinator. So, yeah, I hope everybody was listening, because the hints were dropped. The hints were there, that this was going to be the way the Eagles went, and it is. And, he hasn't done it before. So, anytime you're a first-time offensive coordinator, first-time play caller, you're going to have to prove yourself. But, this guy's not out of left field, is how I would describe it.
I will give you guys some of the pros and cons, or some of the, I guess maybe that might not be the right word. Maybe there's some of the strengths and the weaknesses of this hire, or the concerns with this hire. John, I'll ask you, do you like the hire? You go with it? You like it?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I just said, I mean,
the thing is with me is, like, I don't like, what other option is there at mid-February, after a Super Bowl run? Like that's my whole thing, where it's like, I get it. People aren't in love with the in-house thing because it hasn't worked the last couple of times they did it. But who are you going to hire in mid-February?
Well, that's the thing that's so interesting to me about coaching hires. I mean, if we're all being honest, none of us know. I mean, a lot of people have difficulty being honest about the situation. Nobody knows. I don't know. You don't know. None of the listeners know. I mean, we're going to find out, but Kevin Patulo has nothing to do with Mike Rowe. He's got nothing to do with Brian Johnson. I mean, that's self-evident. So, I mean, going back to that and saying, the whole narrative last offseason was, well, Jalen Hurts, it's the second year. It's the second year. Why was it the second year? Because it was the second year with Shane Steichen. He finally had a play caller for a second year, really. Just over a year, and then they went to the Super Bowl. Well, right up until this year, when it was the first year.
Yeah, but the only problem with that is that the passing game, as we talked about all year, people wanted it to be better. So you could say the same excuse where, all right, well, it would have taken another year to get the passing game going. But I get what you're saying, and
they won the Super Bowl, though.
I know. There's nothing to complain about. But
yeah,
I do, from that perspective. All right, well, here's some of the strengths and weaknesses, and I think they're all pretty simple. I mean, strengths, I think continuity. I mean, you're not going to get a continuity when you're a good football team. We talk about that till we're blue in the face here on Birds 365, but you're just coming off a Super Bowl year. I don't necessarily think it's a great thing to infuse somebody from the outside with a whole new offense, a whole new playbook, and all of those things. So I like it from that perspective. I feel as though, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, you would have a better idea. I feel as though the Eagles knew that Kellen Moore would not be here too long. So maybe has Kevin Patullo been in training for this moment? I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I think that could potentially be a positive about it. He's been in the building since 21, John. So he's seen every up and down of this team with Nick Sirianni. He's been there from the start of Sirianni and Jalen's era. Obviously, Jalen was here the 1 year prior with Doug, but since the start of the Sirianni era, so that's good. And then, as I mentioned, it's mid-February. I mean, who the hell are you? Late February now at this point. Who the heck are we going to hire that's realistic and out there? But the weaknesses are never called plays, John, at any level. So you're talking about a 16-year-old driver who's trying to pass their test, and instead of putting him in a Toyota Camry, you put him in a Lamborghini SVJ, and they get behind the wheel, and you're hoping they can handle it. That would be my biggest weakness. Never called plays before, but I wonder what Jalen's role is and all that. But your thoughts on that, and the strengths and weaknesses of the hire.
Well, me, I think play calling is one of the most overrated parts of the job.
Right.
I think it's, I think most people don't realize that's done 90% during the week. And then you roll it out on game day, and there's a certain feel for it. And some guys have a certain feel in situations. Big Fangio is a good example of that defensively, but the prep work is done during the week, and you basically look at your big menu and you pick off what you decided is the right way to go, and you break it down to situations. And one thing the Eagles are great at and have been great at since Nick got here is situational football, because they prepare for it so much. So, we'll see. And if I said it once, I'll say it a million times. It's about play results, not play calls. So.
Yeah.
If the execution's there, if the offensive line plays at a high level, if Saquon Barkley's going to run for 2,500 yards again, they're going to be just fine. They're going to be just fine. With Kevin Patulo, Parks Frazier, insert name, John McMullen, Zander, Krause, they're going to be just fine as long as the players execute at a similar level, specifically the offensive line.
How do you see Jalen Hurts' role evolving in it, John? I mean, you mentioned at the top, you win a Super Bowl as a head coach, you get a little bit more cachet, you get a little bit more say. I like to believe that's the same thing for the quarterback. Tom Brady, and I'm not to use him, there's any great quarterback. I mean, they have a big part in dictating what their football team does on the offensive side of the ball. Do you think Jalen will have more of that moving forward? I mean, you have a guy.
Yeah, I mean, well, that he already does, and he has, and he continues to be, and that's just the experience part of it as he gets more comfortable, and it helps.
But I mean, even bigger with this, because Kellen did come in at least with a resume of, hey, I've been the coordinator of 2 number 1 offenses.
Yeah, but that's about the teaching part of it. That's about the weak part of it. Like, are you prepared to handle? Like, I think the Eagles figured it out during the playoffs. Is like, all right, we're not great. The old classic hot route. We're not great with hot routes. The Eagles, they haven't been. They're not going to be. So what they do, and I'm going to spike the football a little bit. People like to spike the football. I'm going to spike the football.
Go ahead, Johnny.
What they are good at is go routes. And I said, you know what? This moron's going to blitz. Just run go routes. And they did, and it worked.
And it worked. Yep.
And I think they can take that over to every other team, because if you want to try to deal with AJ Brown one-on-one outside the numbers, be my guest. Be my guest.
Yeah,
and
not gonna work.
It's one of the strengths of Jalen Hurts as well. He's got a nice touch on that ball outside the numbers. And you've seen it time and time again. Is he going to identify a slot blitz and throw behind it? We haven't seen it yet. You continue to evolve, and maybe gets better at it. But I think the Eagles found their cheat code, and they should pound it until somebody stops it. And I don't know how you stop it other than you take the blitz away from them, because you don't want to leave your corner on an island with AJ or Devontae.
No, the only way to stop it, John, is to play the Eagles defense where you don't have to blitz.
Exactly. And that opens up a different aspect, which I think is more of a strength anyway. So I think they figured it out. I think Kevin was a big part of that. I think that will continue. And I think, but for Jalen specifically, just the natural evolution. The more you play, the better you get.
Right.
And he keeps getting better and better and better. And that should continue as he moves forward in his career, because he's still very young, entering his prime years. It should only get better. But yeah, I mean,
pretty amazing to hear you say that, though. Entering his prime years, and we've been, he's taken us to 2 Super Bowls. Pretty impressive resume Jalen Hurts is building.
Yeah, and if you're going to be there certainly it's going to be, and I said it a bunch of times leading up to the Super Bowl. Win or lose, the first thing they're going to do in the offseason is try to evolve again in the passing game, because it wasn't where they wanted it to be for the most of the season. And you're going to hear all those stories again in the off season, the spring, when they get back on the field over the summer, and hopefully it gets better and better and better. And it's a little bit more well-balanced offensively, because you can't count on 2,500 yards. You'd love to say it, but you can't count on it again.
Right.
And you probably have to get a little bit better in the passing game to make up for what's probably a regression to the mean, at least. But the mean should be pretty good still with a healthy Saquon Barkley.
Yep, I agree with all that. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. The reason I said that about Jalen, John, is, we talk about the continuity all the time. And I do understand it's going to be a revolving door, but, one of the best ways, in my opinion, at least to mitigate that is just have your quarterback be more involved. We're not going to have a play calling head coach with Sirianni. They've identified that this is a better setup to have a CEO coach, which I agree with. You've been talking about that for years on Birds 365. So get Jalen more involved. If I'm the new coordinator, I'm coming in, I'm going to Jalen Hurts first. What do you want to build on? What do you want to run? What do you want the identity of this offense to be? And I would build around that. Now, that's me personally. I don't know if it works like that in the NFL. That's what I would do with the young quarterback to try and mitigate some of the continuity concerns. So at least he has his hand on it a little bit more.
Well, that to me is about the teaching aspect of it. Look, already, that's what you want. I always go to Tom Brady. Look, there's a great clip out there. I'll try to find it today where it explains quarterbacking. I've talked about it all the time.
Yeah.
Play calling and Tom explained it. Again, don't listen to me. Listen to Tom Brady. What you're doing is probabilities. All right, what does this team do on 3rd and long? And then you look at your sheet and say, all right, it's 3rd and long. We're going to run this to beat what we think they're going to run defensively.
Right.
Now, sometimes, as Tom said, you come up to the line of scrimmage as a quarterback and you're expecting man and it's zone. Well, you got to get out to make it easier for your team to succeed on that particular play. And that's where the quarterback comes into it. And if the call is based on probability, if they come out with an unscouted look, if they come out with something different than what you expected or their typical trend or what they tendency, that's up, then it's on the quarterback. And that's where I always talk about, that's how guys like Tom Brady and Peyton Manning define themselves and grade themselves. Did I get my team in the best position to succeed on this particular play? Doesn't even mean you have to succeed, because a bunch of things can happen. Left guard can miss a block. Guy could drop a pass.
Right. There's so much context to it.
But if you as a quarterback put your team in the best position to succeed on a particular play, it's a check mark for Tom and people like that. You've done your job.
Right.
Now on to the next play. Same thing. And the more times you do that, the more times your offense and your team are going to be successful.
And in my estimation, from my point of view, it looks like Jalen's making big strides in that department, John. Do you agree?
Yeah, you saw it with the go routes, man.
Yeah.
Now, that's where the help is. Like, a lot of other quarterbacks would go to, all right, they're going to send McDuffie from the slot. We're going to throw right behind it. Eagles aren't good at that. So I think I always say one of the, where they haven't been good at it. One of the hardest things to do as an NFL team, any NFL team, is to be honest with yourself. And to me, the Eagles were very honest with themselves. And they said, all right, we're not good at this right now. What we are good at is this. So if they're going to blitz, they're going to have their corners on the outside. We're just going to throw it to AJ. Now, is that the best probability play? Is it probably, probably not. But
I don't know, with AJ Brown in one-on-one.
Yeah, well, that's part of it.
It feels like he catches everything when he's in one-on-one.
That's part of it. And Jalen's very good at that particular throw as well.
Yeah, there was one play floating around social media. You could see where Jalen, I think he sent Devontae in motion. You could see that the safety was biting down. And once he read that the safety was biting or covering the guy in the flat, boom, he fired that ball deep to AJ in the Super Bowl.
And that's what they do well. And
yeah.
Do what you do well, playing now you still hope to evolve and be able to get better at the other stuff. And they'll be doing that all off season. But when it comes down to it, to win a football game, do what you do best.
No doubt about it. Real quick, John, we're going to get to Ed Krause, who's about to join us in a couple minutes here on Birds 365. Looking forward to talking to Ed. You mentioned Parks Frazier, John. What do we know about Parks Frazier, the Eagles' new passing game coordinator, who is stepping in for what used to be what Kevin Patulo did?
He was with Nick in Indy, and another indication of what winning a Super Bowl does for you. You know,
Right.
this time last year, Nick couldn't do this kind of stuff. Just bring in people he was familiar with, knows, comfortable. You know, Jeffrey kind of insisted, we got to go outside the org, new ideas, fresh ideas. Hey, win a Super Bowl. I want Ed Kratz. I'm getting Ed Kratz.
There you go, baby. That's how it works. I think it should work that way. So that's a good thing. I don't know if do you have any fears of the in-house stuff of Nick going buddy with guys?
Not at all.
I don't either, but I got to ask it because a lot of people are out there saying it. So we'll see
I think it's amusing how many people pump up fresh ideas. Oh, you got to get fresh ideas from out. They all run the same damn stuff.
And they just want a Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's about teaching. It's about execution. Vic Fangio proved that this year. How many people have copied Vic Fangio over in the NFL over the years? It's not about the scheme. It's about teaching the scheme. Same thing on offense
and execution, right? Which is a product of good teaching. Good stuff there, Johnny Mac. Let's get to our quick live read, and then we'll pull up Ed Kratz. Looking forward to talking to Ed joining us here. Last I heard from Ed, you were down in New Orleans, and Ed checked in with a quick score prediction on the Super Bowl, and Ed was correct. So well done by Ed Kratz. We'll talk to him next. Let me tell you guys about the great people at BetUS. Go and check them out now. They've been sponsoring us all year. We appreciate them for that. Use that promo code YouTube150, and it gives you 150% sign-up bonus on your very first deposit. You get 125% on your second and third deposit, all up to $2,000. So deposit less and bet with more at BetUS. Go to betus.com.pa. That's betus.com.pa. They have the fastest payouts in the industry, 24/7 customer support, and they'll even give you your own custom account manager. So big thanks to them for sponsoring the show today. Let's get to our main man, Ed Kratz, joining us now here on Birds 365.